Life, death, resurrection. Realize, restore, renew. Big words. Big words, big ideas. Something, I hope, big enough to be worthy of your attention for a few weeks. I like to think that they're big enough to be worthy of my attention in my life, my commitment, my risk, my full life. Something big enough, good enough to be worth a risk. It's at the heart of us. And the very first scripture that is assigned as our reading for Lent every year is this. Genesis 2:7. And then the Lord God formed the human from the dust of the ground. Well, that's you. You're made of mud. And breathed into the human's nostrils the breath of life. So not just mud. And the human became a living being. We are both of those things, aren't we? We are both dirt and mud and material flesh, but we also have the Spirit of God in us. And without both of those things, we are not human. Lent often begins with this return to our ancestral story to remind us that we are all earthlings, creatures of the earth, creatures of the soil to which we will return, which can seem morbid or depressing. You may be sitting there thinking, I'm not here for a downer. I need something to carry me into my next week. But there is both dignity and humility at the hands of God. And when we embrace both the dignity and the humility, we have a rich spiritual life. So we're not being morbid or depressing. We're being realistic. These things live side by side in us, our mortality, our earthly humanness, the dust, and the spirit that has been blown into, the word in Hebrew is ruach, and that means breath, wind, or spirit. It's all the same word. So the breath of God got blown into your nose. It doesn't sound very romantic, but it's working out pretty well. So these things live side by side in us, and this is the season when Christians take just a little extra time in their days and weeks between now and Easter to recenter. We just rummage around in our minds and our hearts and get God back in the center. So we're going to do that, and whether you feel like you're just like going totally the wrong way and you need a big return, or you're just like, I got some niggly things that aren't working out right because I have decentered God and put myself in the middle. Spiritual humility is a great start for a Lenten journey, and it begins with realization. It takes some humility, some humbleness to be willing to realize what's not working for you, and some humility to realize that you need a power greater than yourself. We remember during Lent that we are not God, that God made us and not we ourselves. We realize that Jesus did not strive for worldly success or power, but in humility continually centered God and his calling by God in his life. There's a humbleness that is called a posture. A posture. Posture is kind of a classical spiritual word. It's a meditative word, it's a mystical word. But the word posture, posture is what you do with your body. And so to have a posture in the world is to have a way of facing the world, embracing the world, being in the world. And today I want to explore with you 3 postures of Jesus. And the first one is humility. A posture of humility is what leads us to become compassionate change makers in the way of Jesus. And it is the total opposite of what our world tells us. So every day when you wake up, there is stuff all around you. Some of it's in your head. Some of it's outside you. Some of it you have no control over, that's trying to pull you away from the thing you want most, which is a deep, rich spiritual life in love with God. Jesus takes a posture of humility throughout his ministry. This is a posture is how it describes our spiritual practices. And we know that Jesus was all the time doing stuff and then going away to pray, and then doing stuff and then going away to pray, and doing stuff and going away to pray. And most of us can't keep that balance perfectly. We're either busy doing stuff, that's good, or we've isolated ourselves and we just sit and pray. But we're going to find a way to do both of those things. And humility is a Jesus posture that we can adapt, and that's how we receive the gifts of grace. This is a spiritual practice you can adapt. Humility. Now, be clear, humility is not humiliation. Humbleness is knowing and having pride in who you are, but not having false pride in who you're not. Knowing that you belong and you are entitled to a seat in the planet and here, but you are good at some things and less good at other things. And so we can rightfully have pride in the ways we have accomplished, we feel, following Jesus well, and humility about the ways that we still have some work to do. Now, another posture of Jesus is inclusion. Deeply embedded in all of Jesus' actions and teachings and the example of his life, it's very clear that he is all about inclusion, bringing people in. He spends almost all of his time with outsiders, people who are not part of the elite, they do not wander the halls of power, they do not have great wealth, they do not have the protection that money and power can bring. And it's because the inclusion is Jesus is reminding us that we're all part of the same creation. I talked to you a few weeks ago about that book about mushrooms. It's so interesting, The Entangled Life. Biologists, economists, ecologists, ethicists, people in political sciences, leaders of great wisdom tradition have all given voice to this same theme. We are connected. We are connected whether you want to be or not. So when we choose a practice of realize for our Lenten practice, we embrace the simple fact that we are dependent upon and accountable to one another. And that includes the stranger, what the Bible calls the alien other. I have a good Jesus story for this. You may have heard this. In those days, there was again a great crowd without anything to eat. So you know where this is going, right? And he called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd because they've been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait, I thought it was the disciples that came to Jesus and said we need to feed these people because it's late. You're not wrong. Same story, but it's earlier in the gospel. This is the second feeding of the thousands in Mark's gospel. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they'll faint on the way. He's not wrong. Right? Jesus is almost always talking to the lowest of the low. And besides which, 98% of the people in ancient times were chronically malnourished. They were lucky to eat enough to keep them alive from day to day. And by being with Jesus with virtually nothing to eat for 3 days, he's not kidding. They're not just uncomfortable. They are literally at risk. And some of them have come from a great distance. His disciples, this is still the same, said, how are we going to feed these people with bread here in the desert? And he said, well, how many loaves do you have? You want to guess what they said? Hey, good for you. Are you reading along? Because the other one is the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, right? Today we have 7 loaves. And he ordered the crowd to sit on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves. And after giving thanks, pay attention to this part. After giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples to distribute. And they distributed them to the crowd. They also had a few small fish. The other story had some regular-sized fish. And he ordered that these too should be distributed. They ate and were filled. They ate and were filled. This is the exact same sentence as the story before in Mark. They ate and were filled. Now, there were about 4,000 people not counting women and children, and they ate and were filled. Mark's audience surely remembers a few pages before this, the feeding of the 5,000. So why would Mark, as the writer, decide to tell a second story about Jesus feeding the thousands? Apart from the obvious, which would be that Jesus must have been feeding the thousands rather often, it wasn't a one-shot deal, here's why. Here's the difference between this passage and the other one. In this one, the compassion factor has been heightened. The compassion of Jesus is centered here. In the other story, it's the disciples who say, look, it's getting late. We don't have anything to feed these people with. You need to send them home. And Jesus said, no, we'll feed them. But this time, it's Jesus who brings the compassion to the fore. These people have spent 3 days without food. They live shortened lives, these ancient people, because they're chronically malnourished. But this time, they all ate and were satisfied. Now, telling the same story more than once is a typical Bible thing. It's part and parcel of every oral culture. We have 2 creation stories right there in Genesis. They're not even related to each other. You could even argue that they're contradictory. 2 creation stories right there in Genesis. We have 2 flood stories. They tend to be woven in, but if you're a biblical scholar, you can tell who wrote what. And that's also in Genesis. And then also in Genesis, twice, Abraham passes off his wife Sarah, as his sister for not very good reasons. All that just in Genesis. And there are 2 versions of the giving of the law, the 10 Commandments at Sinai. And those are in Exodus and Deuteronomy. I guess if you're being told the same story twice, someone thinks you should be paying special attention to it. And what jumped out at me this time was the inclusive nature of this. And I wouldn't have noticed it before, but I was actually reading some biblical scholars, and sometimes we take this story and we don't pay attention to what happened before, and we don't pay attention to what happened after. And in this case, that's everything. Because Jesus is in a foreign land. Jesus is outside the land of the land of the Jews. He is practicing inclusion. In fact, he does it throughout Mark. Every time you hear Mark say, immediately, Jesus is on to some new group. And he goes back and forth across the Galilean lake. And over on the west side, I don't know, I can't tell. Anyway, on the west side, okay, I did it right the first time, thanks. On the west side of the Lake of Galilee are Jewish people, the Judeans. On the east side are Gentiles, non-Jews. So this is not Jesus' hometown crowd. Over here, he's already made a name for himself, and people know who he is. Over here, he's just starting to do this, and these are not his people. And Mark is making a point that would have been obvious to the early readers, but we have to slow down and pay attention. Jesus has crossed the border and out of safe, familiar land. We are not listening here to a simple rerun of the feeding story so we can make sure we get it that Jesus can do magic. Jesus doesn't do this kind of miracle unless there's a reason. Unless there's a reason. He is taking a very bold posture of inclusion here, because Mark is telling his Jewish friends who love Jesus over here on the west what he's doing on the east. And Mark's gospel is like this all the way through, challenging the readers to see Jesus as a master of paying attention to people on the edges, people on the other side, people across the border. A third posture of Jesus that we witness in this story is what I would call collaboration. Collaboration. The crowd has gathered around Jesus from near and far, and now 3 days later they're hungry and weak. It makes me wonder if that 3-day thing might be a hint about what's to come, 3 days in the tomb. I don't know. Maybe that's another sermon. And their total spiritual engagement with Jesus has left them hungry. They've just been so focused and captivated by that. And what we see in this story is this collaboration between human effort and divine grace. And it's no coincidence that human effort happens in the man Jesus, and divine grace happens in the living Christ. Right in himself, Jesus is showing us human endeavor collaborating with divine grace. That's not how we do things. We either think it's hopeless, we throw up our hands and we say, well, God's going to have to take care of this for me because I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and wait for God to tell me what color raincoat to buy. Or we say, I can handle this, God. I got this. I've already made my decision. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, but, would you bless it? That's not what's happening. Collaboration is these things working together. Okay, here's the joke. Thank you. A little preemptive laugh there. So it's not a very good joke. And even if it was a good joke, it wouldn't matter because I can't really tell jokes. But it's got a good point. So the farmer is diligently working his land, planting the seed, watering the fields, harvesting the crops. And the buffoon in this story is the pastor who says to him, look what God did for you. And the farmer says, oh, yeah. And you should have seen what this looked like when God was doing this alone. It's a good point. With Jesus, there is no separation between what God does and what we do. It's a collaborative effort. God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. But we must do for ourselves what we can do for ourselves. I used to try and explain that to my children. There's no point in praying for help on the test if you didn't study. But if you did study, there is a point in praying. It can keep you calm. It can help you focus. It can help you be confident that you know the material. You will do better on a test if you take some time to pray. But you won't do very well if you didn't also take time to study. So in today's story of the feeding of the 4,000, Jesus doesn't simply hold up his hands and say, God will provide, let's see what happens. Although there is one occasion of that in Exodus, with the manna from heaven. But, I think even Moses had something to do that. Stuff does not magically appear. Nor does Jesus rely solely on human accomplishment. Here's what one of us would probably do. We'd say, okay, 7 loaves of bread, half a dozen little fish. We're going to have to separate out who the truly needy are. So we'll start with the children and we'll see if we can feed the children. Everybody else is just going to have to figure it out some other way. They're going to tough it. But when God and humanity work together in Jesus, and we're being told this story so that we understand we can do this too. Later in the Gospels, Jesus says, and you will do many things, even greater things than I have done. We skip that because it seems a little intimidating. But Jesus shows us how it works. It's a posture of collaboration. So today, I am beginning our Lenten journey with a reminder that we are called to a posture of humility, a posture of inclusion, and a posture of collaboration. And that means we are going out in the world intending to be humble, inclusive, and collaborative. And we're going to recenter our desire to do those things. This is a good place to be for a while, awaiting God's gift of realization. Because in the coming weeks, God will show you where you could be more welcoming and inclusive. God will show you ways in which you could be more humble, just not too often, please. God will show you where you can collaborate with God. It's how we practice. It's how we behave. We do what we're invited to, and then we realize what Jesus is talking about. It's a strange thing, but science is starting to affirm this. First you do it, then you get it. We tend to think that what changes us is our thinking. That's not it. What changes us is our doing. So if you begin to practice these things more and more and more, you will have that aha experience of what this means. And this is a gift to us. This is a gift to us because if I have to understand everything before I start following Jesus, you know where that's going to go, which is pretty much nowhere. So here we are on a path together from cradle to grave, all about building the habits of the heart that connect us to God, that are stronger with every passing year. And we are drawn back all the time to what is strongest in our life, which is our connection to our humanity and our connection to what is sacred and divine. For what will it profit us to gain the whole world and lose our lives? If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. So let's go get some life.